if the notes were scoped by the user ID. So every user can have their own set of notes. We've done that before. In Dinoplasty, we ended up scoping everything by their diet. Remember that? Or whatever you used. So we just need a key that represents the user ID at the top level of that notes situation. So what I'm proposing is that the note data, instead of just looking like this, looks instead like this. Right? So at the top level of our database, instead of seeing notes, we see dstruce, and then I suppose inside there, notes. And then that is the object we've been using so far. So how do we do that? We can keep our state the same inside the app, because you're only going to have one notes collection at a time. So when we sync it with Firebase, we should just sync it with a different endpoint. So when we sync state, remember this is how we say which piece of state from our application, and this is how we say where in Firebase it goes. And we said these are like paths. So instead of saying something like, username dot notes, it would be, well, it's UID, right? Something like UID/notes, except the actual UID, right? So what about this? A template string with this .state .uid /notes. Now, if we do this at component will mount, at that point, UID may not be actually set. So instead, and I will allow for the possibility that component will mount may do this later. Let's make a separate method called sync notes that does this. And we'll just move all of this here. Oops. I think I was trying to hit Command X. There we go. So when does sync notes actually need to get called? Not as soon as the page loads necessarily, but as soon as we've got a user ID. Make sense? So auth handler could call it. So auth handler is going to set state, add the UID to state, and then when that finishes, if I just add a second argument to set state, I can put a function in here. And I can just call this .sync notes. Remember, it expects an actual function as the argument, not the return value of a function. And auth handler happens when we click sign in, right? After we successfully authenticate. It calls auth handler, which will then call set state, and when that finishes, it'll call this .sync notes, and not before. Otherwise, we'll end up with null in our database, which doesn't really help us. Click sign in. I've got no notes now, right? Because there are no notes at my UID .notes. So let's add one. Scoped to my UID. Ain't it fancy? Let's go look at Firebase. Look at our data. Here's the notes collection that we already had in there. And now here's a new one. Look, it's my UID. And inside there, I have notes. And inside there, I have the note that I just added. Once again, if I were to add a new note underneath here, there it is. So it's still working both ways, but it is now scoped to my UID. If I log into someone else, I won't see these, I'll see theirs. We do still have this issue of signing out, not clearing out the collection of notes. But still, that's pretty darn cool. Yeah. What did you say? Oh, yeah, sorry. I thought you said you had a question. Yep. So scope notes by UID.